Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe. Today I'm going to be starting this new podcast. I seem to have attracted enough Game of Thrones fans for it to have been desired. That said, I had posted in the community tab a poll asking what people would want, and apparently they wanted a Game of Thrones Dance of the Dragon video. So here we go. The War of the Targaryens, wherein they fought to the death between themselves, is one of great tragedy, especially when one considers that it could have been avoided. The war truly has its seeds, to an extent, in the death of Aemon Targaryen and the appointment of Aelin to the position of Crown Prince, or Prince of Dragonstone. That aside, it seems that if you go with certain tinfoil hat theories, it is possible that there was an earlier possible starting point for this war. That is to say, with, to an extent, the coronation of Jaehaerys Targaryen. And the reason I'm saying that is that Jaehaerys had fought the Septons with words, because he was tired of the endless rebellions on their part, with him wanting to put down these rebellions permanently. So he gathered together minstrels and orators from all across the realm, and had them go around reciting how wonderful him and his queen was. The trouble was, a bit later in the text, that Jaehaerys had decided to make peace with the Church of the Seven. He wanted to rule with their aid. They, on the other hand, were not properly crushed as he believed them to be, but rather they were preparing for the day when they'd have to fight him again, or at least his descendants. As to the other part of the theory, the idea here is called a Maester's conspiracy theory, which posits that the Maesters and the Septons and the Hightowers were really scheming to destroy the Targs. If you like this idea, go with it. If you don't, don't. But the idea is that there's something fishy about their comportment throughout Jaehaerys' reign and throughout the reign of his successor, Viserys. And even the appointment of Viserys' crown prince after the death of his father was fairly fishy, as there was a grand council meeting to determine who should be the next king after Jaehaerys. It was decided that they'd have a secret ballot. The ones who gathered the votes were the Maesters and the Septons. So naturally they'd have they'd want to see their man on the throne. And as they were keen to exploit Viserys, Rhaenys got shafted. Her husband, Corlys Velaryon, admiral of the royal fleets, was not exactly impressed. So he kind of swore off his admiralty, took off, and said, "Screw you." He pouted for a while, but eventually did come back. Jaehaerys passed away, and in turn Viserys took the throne as King Viserys I. And Viserys was not a bad king. He actually, contrary to what some say, he was actually pretty good. He made peace with just about everyone. He kept the realm together. He was keen on having a son early in his reign, but soon gave this up and contented himself with his daughter, who she in turn ended up going on to become queen. Viserys had one daughter, that was to say Rhaenyra. It was she that he began to groom for the throne, which is a little funny considering he ended up claiming it and dethroning in this way the claim of Rhaenys Targaryen, as she was his main rival. So you had two competing claims, and he dislodged hers in one thanks to the Hightowers deliberately began to try to attract his gaze towards Alicent Hightower, a beautiful young woman whom he shared many interests with and was familiar with thanks to the fact that she used to read to Jaehaerys Targaryen, and it was said that she did more for the sickly old man, but I find that doubtful. That aside, Viserys would wed her and father many sons with her, and one daughter. His eldest son, Aegon, whom would later try to usurp the claim of Rhaenyra. And let's be clear, she did have a claim, because her father had favored her, and as previous Targaryen monarchs had never fully put together a proper system of succession, this meant that whoever nominated the successor had legitimacy on their side, and thus Rhaenyra had a better claim than her younger brother, at least in regards to Targaryen succession. In real-world terms, this succession makes no sense, to be quite honest. But the Targaryens never really operated on logic and more on whims. So they had modeled their dictatorial, absolute monarchic style of rule on the very idea that whatever I say goes. And thus, this was how it was supposed to go with the succession. The only real piece of drama between father and daughter was over the fact that she eventually married his younger brother, Daemon Targaryen. And Daemon was the anti-hero of this story, but he was also a brutal warlord type. who had formed a close bond with Corlys Velaryon, as the two of them felt suspicious of the Hightowers, so that you thus had two opposing factions growing, the Blacks and the Greens. And Rhaenyra formally semi-joined one side, I would argue, with her marriage to Daemon. That aside, she technically founded the faction, but I'd argue she was more the most recent figurehead, given that the faction technically had its seeds in Corlys and Rhaenys. In turn, Aegon was but a sideshow to his grandfather and mother, who were the real founders of the Green faction, to an extent, at least in its most recent incarnation. Aegon, though, did not wish to quarrel with his sister. Marked contrast, his younger brother, who had been squire to Criston Cole, had no such compulsions, so that when the time came and Aegon was duly crowned king by virtue of his mother and grandfather crowning him after his father had died, under very questionable circumstances, I might add. With the Greens, they were remarkably prepared for such an event. And outside killing one small council member due to Criston Cole being psychotic, Aemond took off for the Baratheon home of Storm's End, where he was soon joined by Luke Targaryen, the son of Rhaenyra from her first marriage. And what followed was a dispute because the boy was very obviously the secret son of Harwin Strong and Rhaenyra. And years ago, the boy had taken the eye of Aemond in a dispute when they were but children. So there was some bad blood between these two. Trouble was, Luke did not manage to assuage the concerns of Boros Baratheon, who, feeling betrayed by Rhaenyra, and as though he were being treated as little more than her slave, turned on her and was rather keen to ally with the Greens, especially since Aemond had agreed to marry one of his daughters. This daughter ended up humiliating Aemond and badmouthing him until he flew into a rage and decided to chase down Luke in the storm outside, and what followed was a dragon fight in the air. Sadly, tragically, Luke died. The news, when it reached Rhaenyra, left her completely shocked. Having been pregnant, she could not cross the narrow sea to claim her throne, and so she had nothing she could do except wait. And now that weight had come back to haunt her. With her one dead son, she was more than prepared to push for war. In turn, though, her husband had connections still within King's Landing, the capital city, and had two thugs, Blood and Cheese, slip into the palace and murder one of the sons of Helena Targaryen, the wife of Aegon Targaryen. Thus, the scene was set for a war that both sides had tried to manipulate their way around. Nobody truly wanted, but that certain psychos on both sides were keen to push forward. And also the Maesters may have been keen to push forward because, they don't really like dragons being around. And given how destructive and violent dragons are in the Martin universe, who could blame them? That said, they had gone about this the wrong way. In turn, the only thing one could feel thankful for is that Aemond was firmly punished for his misdeeds. However, he was too skilled a warrior and dragon rider for them to really ground him for very long. So if you enjoyed this video, do let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button to stay tuned for the next video.